fine. Good evening, everyone. My name is Patience Kamau, and I would like to welcome you to this, our first webinar for the spring semester at the Zaire Institute for Restorative Justice at the Center for Justice and Peace Building. I will give you a brief introduction to Zoom, which we are using right now, and just a rundown on what to expect in the next 90 minutes. So I'll begin with a brief Zoom introduction. And then we'll have Johonna Turner, who will introduce our speakers, Tom DeWolf and Jody Geddes. Following that will be the presentation by both Jody and Tom. Thank you, Tom and Jody, for joining us today. And then after that, we will have a Q&A session that will be moderated by Dr. Turner. After that, we will have announcements by Julian Ward, who is our graduate assistant, and then there will be closing. For the quick Zoom introduction, for the Q&A session, we ask you to please use the Q&A dialog box to ask questions. Do not use the chat feature because we will not be able to see your questions that way. So when we get to the Q&A session, please use the dialog box. That way the moderator and both our guests, Tom and Jody, can see the questions and go through them and answer them and give you answers. Also, do not use the raise hand feature because we will not be monitoring that. But if you have any other technical questions that you have, you can send those through the chat feature and we can do what we can. Thank you very much for being with us, and I will hand it over to Johonna Turner. Hi, Johonna.
Hi, Patience. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Zaire Institute for Restorative Justice's monthly webinar series. My name is Johonna Turner, and I serve as co-director of the Zaire Institute. This month, our webinar is a virtual book launch of a newly released book in the Little Books of Justice and Peace Building series, The Little Book of Racial Healing, coming to the table for truth-telling, liberation, and transformation. Our guests this month are the book's authors, Jody Geddes and Tom DeWolf. I'd like to tell you a little information about each of the authors. Jody Geddes is a Caribbean-American immigrant, community organizer, writer, and restorative justice healer. She works at Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, where she does many things, one of which includes exploring the possibility of a national truth and reconciliation process in the U.S. She's also the president of the board of managers for Coming to the Table. Tom DeWolf is the executive director of Coming to the Table and is a certified STAR practitioner. He is the author of Inheriting the Trade and Gather at the Table, The Healing Journey of a Daughter of Slavery and a Son of the Slave Trade. Tom is featured in the Emmy-nominated documentary Traces of the Trade, A Story from the Deep North. Welcome, Jody. Welcome, Tom. We're so glad that you are able to be with us to talk about this new book, The Little Book of Racial Healing, and also the work that generated the book. I'm going to turn it over to you all now to really tell us more about the book, the content, and then after that, we'll have some time to interact with our guests and their questions about what you'll share with us today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you, Patience and Johonna, for that incredible introduction. We are really excited to share our journey with you, and also this gift that I think in many ways has been gifted to us for us to continue to just challenge where we are as a nation, but also where we have been, and to create space for us to really dream out loud about where we're going. I feel like there was a lot of dreaming that Tom and I did before this book and during the process of writing this book. And so what we're going to do first is just give you a little bit of an introduction about Coming to the Table, if you don't know a lot about Coming to the Table. And if you already do, you might learn something new. And so thank you for joining us, and we're really excited to get started.
Yeah, just really pleased to be here with you, Jody, with you, Johonna, and everyone who's joined in from around the world. Coming to the Table got started in January 2006. There were about 24 descendants of whose ancestors were either enslavers or had been enslaved, who came together at the invitation of the descendants of President Thomas Jefferson, and of the Hairstons, one of the largest plantation owning families in U.S. history, and learned about the Center for Justice and Peace Building, restorative justice principles, trauma awareness and resilience. And it was just a profound weekend. That's what the whole coming to the table approach is founded on, are these principles that are taught there at CJP, at EMU. And a vision and a mission were developed for coming to the table of a truthful and just society that acknowledges and seeks to heal from the racial wounds of the past, from slavery and the many forms of racism that it spawned. And the mission of the organization is to provide leadership, resources, and a supportive environment, and the occasional book for all who wish to acknowledge and heal wounds from racism that is rooted in the United States history of slavery. And coming to the table from that point began to grow and has just continued on. So Jody?
My introduction, thank you for that time. My introduction to coming to the table came through a local group, so the Shenandoah Valley group that was meeting at EMU. And for me, I always tell this story. It wasn't something that was fun and felt really transformative, but it was a moment for me to really reflect on my commitment to racial healing, but ultimately something beyond freedom. What does liberation look like in this body, in this time? And what does it mean to build communities that are liberated? And so from my first coming to the table meeting, I decided that I would continue to, metaphorically and physically come back to the table. We have many different local affiliate groups all across the country. And we also find that many people in other countries are interested in starting their own local affiliate group, because what we know is these wounds of slavery and racial oppression and genocide exist all across the world. And so folks are really looking for a way to engage in these conversations. Sometimes it's quick to go to the head and say, this is how we shift the system, right? And for some people, they need to come from a heart space. And I think that's what I really learned as someone that was an organizer that then sat in a circle and really had to open myself up to listening to the stories of people that didn't look like me, but was experiencing a lot of the same feelings I was because of these wounds of slavery. And so our local affiliate groups is what continues to allow coming to the table to grow, because people come to one group and they feel moved and they continue to come back because there is a genuine energy in the space. There is a space that is calling for healing, but it's also a process that says we can name the ways that we are perpetuating the harms of the system. And we can also say that here is how we're going to do better. Here is how we're going to shift that, right? So it's not a place of calling folks out, but really calling folks in to say, what is your story? And if you think you don't have a story, this is an opportunity to begin to explore what that looks like. We also have a national gathering. Some folks who are associated with the local group attend those national gatherings, which happens every 2 years on the beautiful campus at Eastern Mennonite University. And the national gathering is incredible. It's an opportunity just to have some really good food. We also have different workshops, ranging from workshops about genealogy to how to start a local group. And those workshops are also led by different co-chairs of the local affiliate group. So it's really everyone saying, this is what I've learned and I want to pass that on and share that with others. And so how do we begin to create this community of learning? And in addition to that, we have what we're exploring as our Leadership Training Institute, really holding these workshops where folks are building these concrete organizing skills, as well as skills in understanding trauma. Because when we talk about trauma, it is a wound. And racial oppression has created a wound in all of us, right? And in this nation and many other nations. And so how do we begin to acknowledge that? Sometimes folks are coming from a heart space and good intentions are important, but how do we scaffold the kind of heart space folks are bringing by saying, here are some general community organizing skills. Here is the way that trauma shows up, right? And for many people, that's also a process of healing to say, this is what I've been experiencing, and I didn't do this to myself, that there's some other forces working here, right? So, understanding also restorative justice, we use circle process to hold space, right? So folks are seeing a new way of engaging with each other that says that they can be seen, but it also opens up space for them to see others, right? Recognizing the interconnectedness that they have. And so, our local groups, our members, these trainings has really shown the growth of coming to the table, just starting in this family reunion style and folks saying, I want to bring this back to my community. And when we talk about the foundation of coming to the table within the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the things that Reverend Barber says that his mother found most powerful was when Dr. King told everyone to go back home, right? This idea of what does it mean to go back home and to serve, right? And so they might come to EMU, to a national gathering, have a transformative experience, and then go back to San Antonio, Texas, and start a local group. Go back to Seattle and start a local group. Go back to Oakland, California and start a local group. That's what it is about, going back home. And what does it mean to create a safer, more healthier, more healed home? And so we also have a map to show you a little bit. It doesn't capture all of our groups. There's definitely more that need to be added. And so for coming to the table members that are on here, if your local group is not represented, we know that. So we have about 30 local groups right now in about 13 states, which has grown since our last national gathering because many people came, some that had been coming for a while, and it's scary to start a local group. These conversations are difficult to have, and sometimes folks are looking at you for answers. And once again, the national gathering creates a network for folks to say, this is possible. Other people are doing it. And so from that national gathering, we had probably about like 3 to 4 more new groups, and there are many that are forming right now. And then as you can see, our website continues to get many different visitors. There are a lot of resources on our website. We want to make these resources accessible and available for all. And that's one of the reasons we chose to do a little book, right? The little book is really accessible. Elders in the community can read it as well as young people, right? And so the work of racial healing, aren't just for folks who see themselves as organizers, but there's a place in the work of racial healing for everyone. Also thinking about the use of social media to be able to leverage, the work that we're doing. So engagement with Facebook and our newsletter, as well as, the ever-growing Instagram and Snapchat. So really thinking about what does it mean to use social media to also build those strong ties. Most local groups have their own Facebook page as well, and that's an opportunity to use polls and engage with folks, but to also, post different news articles so folks are knowing what's happening in their community, but also understanding what's happening in other communities so that they can receive support to continue to do that work. So really, giving props to our local affiliate groups for holding the work of coming to the table and really bringing that forth continuously.
So the genesis of this whole project was a little over 2 years ago, immediately following the 2016 Coming to the Table National Gathering, was the RJ in Motion conference held on the campus of EMU. And Jody and I led one of the workshops there, and very well attended. And it was, it's been challenging to talk about sort of the difficult situation that arose during that conference. And it was during all day workshop the day prior to the conference when things came up related to race that were triggering for a lot of people. And there are times when I, as a white man, will, what I've been taught is to sugarcoat things. But inspired by Robin DiAngelo and her book, White Fragility, that is still on the New York Times bestseller list after a few months of being published, it's really important that we name when harm happens, that we name why it happens, how it happens, and what we can do in response to it. And what happened at the conference that day before were some ways in which things were presented that triggered people around issues of race, traumatic feelings that then were not dealt with. And many people were quite upset. And eventually, a few days later, still during the conference, a circle process was set up for the end of the day that Kate Pranis, who's the author of the Little Book of Circle Processes, she was there and she led this circle process. There were probably 30, 35 people in this circle to work through the hurt and the strong feelings that had come up. And, you know, they scheduled it for an hour and it went 4 or 5 hours. They had to bring in pizza because everybody missed dinner and everybody missed the evening presentation. But people used the principles that CJP stands for and that Coming to the Table stands for to begin to work through the hurt, to work through the woundedness and work toward healing that evening. And I won't pretend to say that everything was solved in one circle process, but a lot of stuff was opened up and shared openly and honestly. Jody and I spent some pretty good time talking with various folks at the conference, you know, including Carl Stauffer and others who were organizing the event. And really what came out of this and was already planned was to do more writing in general, or more creation of materials and resources for the restorative justice community generally. And Jody and I agreed to contribute some writing about issues of race, that it was really important that people in the RJ field understand the importance of what W.E.B. Du Bois pointed out is the biggest problem in America is the color line, and to be real open and clear and honest about that, and work towards undoing the damage and healing from the damage. And so we thought we'd probably be writing an article for a periodical or maybe a chapter for an anthology. But what evolved was the idea to create this little book that would pull together all the various pieces of the Coming to the Table approach into one place that could be used as a resource, as a workbook for people wanting to utilize this particular approach to healing the wounds of racism. And, you know, submitted the proposal and it was accepted, and on we went. And in the spirit of Coming to the Table, it was important to us that we collaborate with a lot of others. And we had, you know, for instance, we had 3 Coming to the Table writers who read every, you know, the whole thing and gave us advice and input on editing the book, in addition to our editor, Barb Toes, who's formerly at EMU and now she's at University of Washington. She was our main editor. And then we had, it was 7 or 8 additional writers who submitted illustrative sidebar stories for each of the chapters to help bring them alive. And so that's how the whole thing began. Jody, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think as restorative justice, I think we all have to be courageous and name when harm happens in the space. And also we have to talk about race, not in these abstract ways, but the ways that it continues to come up in our everyday lives. Because I think we might often make an assumption that, you know, it doesn't affect us or it's not happening, you know, because we're living through it, we're going through the motions. And I think especially as restorative justice practitioners, we have to talk about race. One of the things that I always say that sometimes get me in trouble, that I say restorative justice isn't a tool. You know, you put tools in a garage or you put it in a toolbox and you use it when you need it, when it is convenient, right? You fix things when it gets so broken to the point where you can no longer use it, right? And so how do we see restorative justice as this transformative shift about the way that we engage with each other, right? So not just waiting until when harm happens or there's a breakdown in communication and relationship and now we've made each other disposable, but before that, right? What does it mean to live in communities where we can hold each other accountable and also do that coming from a place of love. For me, I think that, we won't shift and transform systems until we start looking at restorative justice with a racial justice lens. And I think particularly in this country, when we look at the foundation of this country and what has continuously led to the mass amounts of violence and oppression that many communities face on a daily basis, it comes down to race and capitalism. And so if this movement that is talking about healing, right, and, ending the prison industrial complex isn't talking about race, the world that we are dreaming up will only be a reflection of this one. And so I think, and it makes sense why we weren't engaging in those conversations about race. We see the system as as the man, and it becomes something that is so large that none of us can conquer, right? And sometimes we have to kind of reel that back and get a sense and control of reality. And so I think that's a huge part of the reason why we struggle with it. But I also think that, we have this process of remembering that gives us space to dream, and we need to hold more of those opportunities. I think that's one of the things that, the conference did, because afterwards we recognized what happened, and folks said, how do we use our skills as filmmakers, as writers, as practitioners to dream about something else, right? And this anthology came out of that, creating space of dreaming. There was a lot of dreaming happening with this book, but I think I just have to urge folks, especially restorative justice practitioners or folks who are doing restorative justice, that you have to do this work with a racial justice lens, because many of these systems that we're talking about are embedded, within racial hierarchy and capitalism. And the more we know, on some level, it becomes harder to see it, because we can see the good and all the great things that are happening and then forget about the systems that are dropping bricks on our people. And so I think, that's just what I continue to urge folks to do, to really think about where this kind of racial justice is aligned with healing justice and begin to use that lens. And when I talk about race, it isn't just black or white. That racism is something that is much deeper than these racial categories that we've been assigned. And I think that's a part of the lens that sometimes allows us not to see the larger picture and the ways we can transform those systems.
So the book is divided up into the various aspects of what coming to the table represents. And like there's a chapter on trauma awareness and resilience, a chapter on restorative justice, and then there's a chapter on each of these four pillars that coming to the table rests on. Uncovering history, which is the research, acknowledgement, the sharing of personal, family, community, and national histories of race. It's the making connections is with others, both within and across racial lines, and building authentic, accountable, real relationships. And then working towards healing is exploring how we can heal together using any means necessary. And then finally, action is this active championing of systemic and structural change throughout our society in all aspects of life, and to support equality and justice and healing for everyone. And so that's sort of the foundation upon which coming to the table operates. And Jody, will you talk a bit about circles and touchstones and values?
Yeah. And so, I think, for those of you that have sat in a circle there, even as like a holder of space, a circle keeper, there's a kind of energy that we bring with us, certain assumptions we bring with us. And then when the process begins, or even before it begins, there's an energy that shifts. And I think it's based within this value, this principle of Ubuntu, I am because we are. We truly begin to see each other beyond our kind of racial categories, beyond the mask we wear, beyond your aesthetic style, right? There's a different opening that happens where there's a container where folks feel safe enough to share deeply. And I think it's also happening to, I guess for a lack of better word, this humanness, that there's a way that we want to connect, but there are these structures that don't allow for it. One of the things that I say in life all the time is time isn't real. And it doesn't mean I don't honor folks showing up and giving their time, but it's really about not prioritizing, you know, my watch over the relationship. One of the things that happens is we'll see each other in passing and say, hey, how are you doing? Your back is already turned by the moment someone might respond. Or these days, folks don't respond anymore because we have gotten into this place where we know that the person isn't going to stand and listen to what the response is going to be. So there's this way that we are often not making space to really be able to see each other. And I think that circle process creates a container to be able to see each other. And it also says that I'm not assuming anything about, you know, your intentions or coming with judgment, but creating space for all sharing to happen, right? Where folks are creating their own narratives instead of us falling into the narratives that have been told to us about ourselves, but also told about other people. One of the things, this image is really popular, and many of you have probably seen it everywhere. It's on Joy's website, you know, and many other websites. And sometimes we don't know the story behind it. It's still controversial about what the true story is, but I think this is kind of getting to the essence of what I'm saying. And so the story kind of goes that, you know, an anthropologist, you know, went into a community and was sitting with these young people in circle and named to them, you know, whoever runs to the tree the fastest to get the fruits will get the sweetest fruit. And the story goes that what he recognized is that the young people began to lock hands with each other and get the fruit in unison, right? And so although in some ways there were these instructions given that can be seen as competitive and folks kind of going against each other, they actually went together to get all of the fruits. And so when asking why, they began to name this traditional practice of Ubuntu. I am because we are, right? So the idea that if I am eating, I need to create space to share that at the table, right, with everyone else, right? And so I think Circle creates this container that says I am because we are, I see you. And that's exactly, I think, what happened in my first coming to the table circle where, you know, there are a lot of tears. I was probably one of two Black folks in the space. And I wasn't holding that practice that I felt like I was carrying through the world. I am because we are. And so I had to kind of really check myself about what was happening. And a lot of it was the rejection of this opening energy that the circle was bringing that I was refusing. So it wasn't that the circle wasn't going well. It was my own rejection because of my own woundedness and internalized racial oppression, right? And here I am in a circle that I've been in places with predominantly white folks, but this was a different energy where I wasn't called to teach folks about racial oppression. I wasn't called to tell folks how to solve racism. It was really just about being that I was Jody beyond, you know, like this young Black Caribbean woman, right? And so really thinking about how circles can be a space of transformation and challenge, that our circles should challenge us, right? When we sit together, we should challenge each other, right? And in that challenge, also recognize that relationships can still exist. So in conflict, relationships still exist. In disagreement, relationships still exist. So it's a way for us to really check ourselves on the way that we can easily dispose of each other because we might not agree on something, or we might feel like we have different values. And so I think this story really captures the essence of this kind of childlike innocence that says we want to connect, and we are connected, in fact, but there are these structures that divide us, such as race and capitalism. So I just really love this image and what it's really capturing. That's all. So this is my favorite chapter of the book. And I think it's the one that we didn't have, I wouldn't say difficulty, Tom, but we really thought about what it meant to present this in a little book. I think talking about liberation and transformation, you can have many different volumes. For me, it was really important as a Black woman. I guess I'll share the story that I wrote about in the book, but you should still get the book. And so in the last chapter, I talked about a conversation with a mentor of mine from undergrad, Jada Monica Drew. And we were talking and I just said, I'm trying to get free. Just said it casually. I didn't even think about it. It just came out. And she paused the conversation for a moment to kind of explore with me what that freedom meant. And she's someone I've looked up to. She has her own business where she's doing racial justice and healing work, amongst many other things. And she was really beginning to talk about the way she felt free now. And for me, it was this moment of relief, because here I was looking up to this, mentor, this Black woman that was living the life that she wanted to have despite all these systemic barriers and harms. And so it didn't mean that the system of racism and capitalism and, economic oppression didn't exist, but she was creating space to live the life that she knew she deserved and live the life that she wanted. And even now, I'm probably not capturing it in the best ways, but I was just blown away in the middle of this conversation. And I then began to really explore like the different privileges that I have financially and academically, so many different things. But also, how do I not just work on freedom in terms of shifting policy and, ending the prison industrial complex and our hierarchical system of racism and capitalism, but what are things I'm doing now to cultivate freedom in my life? And also, what am I teaching my young people that I work with, right? And that's when I began to explore this thing about a world beyond freedom, right? Especially with my young folks, if I say you're no longer in bondage, what does that mean? That freedom isn't just about, not being incarcerated again and just graduating from high school and just having a job, but there is more to that. And so, I encourage folks to really think about what does liberation and transformation look like now, meanwhile also recognizing that there's space to still dream of the world that we want. And so I think this chapter was the most difficult, but I think it's a space that we are moving, I think, as a nation, as coming to the table members and organizers, as practitioners. I think folks are really wondering, what does freedom look like? The more and more it feels like there's less of it. And so I really want to think about cultivating freedom in the body, right? Because our bodies are also colonized. So we talk about the colonized system, but our bodies are also colonized. It's colonized in the way that we're taught, to worship, the way that we're taught to walk, to breathe, to be, to dress, to speak. And I think for me, I wanted to write something where I wasn't telling Black and brown folks what to do, but to explore my own journey, because maybe folks could see themselves within it. Maybe they could see themselves as the Jada Monica Drew or the Jody, or they could be like, I don't even know what's going on, right? But there's a space where they begin to explore, something beyond freedom, liberation and transformation that can happen in the body and also on a systemic level. Is there anything you want to add, Tom?
I agree. This was certainly a challenging chapter to write, but that's where the journey takes us, is in the direction of liberation and transformation. And one of what you'll read in the book, there's a poem that was written by Kimberly James. She's a woman I met when we were filming Traces of the Trade back in 2001, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And she lives in Southern California and came to a workshop that Jody and I co-facilitated in Los Angeles about a year and a half ago. And she, on her Facebook page, wrote this poem. And, she called it like rough and unpolished. But this really captured for me just a critically important aspect of this work when she writes, she was getting ready. She was on a plane flying from London to Accra in Ghana. And she says, it feels good to be here on this plane filled with Black people of all shades, hair textures, and styles. People speaking different languages, filling economy, business, first class, friends, families, and couples, kids, laughing, working, reading, sleeping, being, the point, the center, the norm. My heart swells with joy because it's not often that I am the point, the center, the norm. If you're white in America, in much of the world, really, you're used to being the point, the center, the norm. And it goes on from there. And there's things that I, as a white man, have never experienced, that Jody has experienced, that Kim has experienced, that Johonna has experienced. And it's because of the system of white supremacy upon which our nation is founded and continues to operate. And our hope with this chapter and with this book is the recognition that, one of the things somebody said early on when we told them what we were doing, they said, wow, racial healing, that's a big topic for a little book. And we point that out a few times in this story. There's this, one of the things that I wrote in this chapter is that in these challenging days, when white supremacists are emboldened by the words and example of a US president to create more racial havoc, it's more important than ever for white people to stand up, speak out, and take action for racial justice and healing, dismantle racist systems and structures, and work toward transformation and liberation for everyone. Use the advantages whiteness affords you to make a positive difference. And this is, for me, for white folks, people who consider ourselves white in a system and structure nationally and internationally, worldwide, that values whiteness over everything else, is to learn, to pay attention, to read, to build the relationship, study history, work towards healing, take the action, read this little book. But really, because this is such a big topic for a little book, we hope that you'll pay really close attention to what follows that last chapter, and that's recommended reading, which then if you go onto the Coming to the Table website, that's expanded even further. It was cut down in the book for space, for the number of pages that fit into a little book. But there's a lot of work that we all need to do. I just particularly focus on white folks because I know how typically we are raised, typically how we are enculturated, how we are socialized and educated, consciously and subconsciously, to perpetuate whiteness as the ideal. And our work to undo it requires reading books like this, like White Fragility, like My Grandmother's Hands, whole list of books in that recommended reading that we hope people will dive in, because this is not a one-time thing. This is a lifelong journey and a lifelong obligation for all of us to take care of ourselves, to heal ourselves collectively. And, what I've learned through my years of doing this work is that honestly, transparently, racism is on white people. We started it and we need to end it. And this little book, Jody and I sure hope that it helps people along that journey. And that, like this quote on the page, I have no interest in making white people feel guilty or ashamed. Actually, if people want to feel guilty and that gets into the room, I'm okay if you want to feel a little guilty, but once you're in there, let go of the guilt, because as I learned at the very first weekend of Coming to the Table, is guilt is the glue that holds racism together. When I feel guilty, I build my walls to protect myself. So read White Fragility right after you're done reading the little book of racial healing. And we do hope that this makes a big difference in a lot of people's lives throughout this nation and this world. We'll be facilitating a couple of workshops coming up in May and June in North Carolina and Virginia. And this is something we've done a few times in the past, and they always fill up pretty quickly. You can find it on the Coming to the Table website, how to register. And if you're interested in thinking about starting a local group where you live, there's information on the website on how to do that. You send the contact, go to the contact page and send an e-message. We will receive that and respond for whatever, wherever you are on your journey and whatever support you need. Coming to the Table is a real different kind of organization. It's focused. We have a lot of people who march and sign petitions and lobby for changes in laws. But Coming to the Table as an organization, that's not the focus. The focus is on changing hearts and minds of individuals and communities. Because until we change hearts and minds, all the marching and changing of laws isn't going to accomplish the dismantling of colonial and racist and oppressive systems. We passed these laws in the 60s, and look what's happening in the United States today. So we've got a lot of heart and soul and mind work to do. And I'll leave it there. And Jody, do you have any more to add as I step off my soapbox here?
That was perfect. Just thank you all for holding this space with us and sharing it. We're open and look forward to your questions. I'm still shocked that I co-authored a book. So just really holding that space to think about how to get words onto those pages. So thank you all again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jody and Tom. I think you've shared a lot for further thought, further dialogue, and to really provide a framework for discussion. We have some incredible guests joining us. Many of them who have experience with coming to the table. Some leaders from Coming to the Table are there. I believe, I'm sure we also have some people of Coming to the Table chapters, but also many other guests joining us who have who are part of significant, substantial work around the country for racial justice and racial healing. Some are involved in work around reparations. Some are involved in work around healing in response to police sanctioned killings in the U.S. So just a range of guests doing lots of different things. So I'm really excited. I wish we could bring them live so we can have a discussion, but I'm excited to read some of their comments and questions. And I'd also like to invite those of you joining us, about 80 of you joining us, to actually go to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and type a comment or a question. And unless you've told me otherwise, I actually want to read your name. And if you are in a Coming to the Table chapter and want to share that you're in a chapter, so I can add that, or where you're located so I can also share that, please feel free to add that in your question or comment, or just to put where you are, and we can share that. So let me just start with a basic question. This question, and please excuse me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, since we don't have a pronunciation aid as part of our text, but this question is coming from Fatima Malik, and Fatima is asking you to share about the image on the book, the cover of the book. Can you talk a little bit about the cover image?
The process of writing a book is really an interesting one. And one of them is, though we write the book, the publisher is the one who puts it all together. And this cover image, like the cover image of all the Little Book series, is an image by Howard Zehr, who launched this series of books. And there was a different image on an earlier version of the book that was more spring-like. And when I first saw this one, it's like, wow, that looks pretty cold. And I've grown to really love this image because it's showing life. It's showing a leaf in the midst of the cold, that after winter is going to come spring, and I find it to be a very hopeful image, and one that I'm really glad that the publisher, the designers, chose this particular one of Howard's images.
Beautiful. Thanks. I didn't know that was one of Howard's images. So great. That was a great question. And that question, Fatima is actually at UC Davis hosting racial healing circles, and also shares that having met Stacy Walton, who's hosting the local Coming to the Table chapter in Sacramento?
Sacramento, yes.
West Sacramento. So that's really cool. And then we also just have some greetings. So Lori Meyer is here from Harrisonburg, right here in Harrisonburg. Just got the book in the mail today and is excited about reading it. Angela Dickey is joining us, who's a at-large member of Coming to the Table, joining from Arlington, Virginia. We also have thanks from Bernice Bennett, thanking you for writing the book and asking about your availability to come on the Blog Talk radio show that Bernice hosts to discuss the book. So many invitations coming your way. Are you all taking any kind of additional invitations or doing any traveling to promote the book? Going other places? Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what's happening next?
Yes, we are. That's the short answer. We are actually, Tom and I are actually prepping to do some speaking engagements right now in addition to the trainings. And so if folks are interested, you can you can definitely contact us through the online Coming to the Table website or our personal emails as well. And so that's yes, we would be really happy to just hold that space and just share with folks. Also encouraging different colleges and universities to invite us to speak, because I think that is a space where Coming to the Table can really grow.
Yeah, the first place will be is next month at the Samuel Proctor Conference in Alabama, where we'll be on a panel speaking there and presenting about the book. But yes, Bernice, of course, we'd be happy to join you on your show, which is a wonderful resource for these issues.
And what's the best way to contact you all about for those kinds of invitations?
You know, if people can go to comingtothetable.org, and there's a contact us page there, and just fill out an e-message, and that'll come directly to us. We'll be able to do that easily. Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. So I'm going to just do a couple of just kind of, some people are just doing some shout outs. So just do a couple of those before we get to some more questions. So hello to Angela. Angela Dickey also just wants to say hello to you all as well. Some of us know Angela. Phoebe Kilby is also on with us. We have David Ragland. Hey, what's up, David? Jenny Poritz is also joining us. Ellen Berry in California is also here with us. So lots and lots of people with considerable experience and work around these questions, many of whom you all know. And I know that, and that's just tip of the iceberg. We'll do some more shout outs later. But let's go on to some questions, more questions. One question that's been shared, this question actually comes from Phoebe Kilby, who has been a leader in Coming to the Table for most of, I think, the history of Coming to the Table, really all of the history of Coming to the Table. And Phoebe's asking you all to talk about when feelings of needing to protect yourself during interracial interactions and conversations come up. And I can imagine, I mean, Jody, you spoke to that just a little while ago. You talked about that. So in your experience with both conversations at Coming to the Table gatherings, at Coming to the Table maybe chapters, and then also just more generally, do you have any strategies to offer about what to do when those feelings come up and how to move away from defensiveness and work toward kind of more openness that might lead to some specific kinds of transformative experiences?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I feel like I have my imaginative answer, and then when it happens, my actual answer. Yeah, I think once I began to accept the work I was called to do, I think a lot of my defensiveness kind of calmed itself. And so a lot of times when I'm holding space and having interracial conversations, I think, especially if I'm being honest, because I just move with radical honesty, with a lot of people of color who are not Black and have a lot of white privilege in the world, I think one of the things I try to do a lot is to hold space to listen to their story. And so to ask a lot of questions. And I also name that to folks that say that I'm kind of wrestling a little bit and sometimes I name that I'm feeling uncomfortable with what folks are sharing, and then begin to ask questions of them, right? Because I think a lot of it is because I've lived a different narrative. Sometimes I can make the assumption that folks will understand, or they live something similar to it. And so a lot of what I find myself doing is holding space to listen to folks. I think when those conversations become problematic, I name what needs to be named, and then I walk away from the table. Because I think there is a way that Black bodies who see themselves as organizers or practitioners are taught to continue to allow these kind of wounds to be inflicted for the sake of the larger goodness of the work, to teach people, right? That in the teaching people that like I need to hurt. And so I think I've come to the place where it's kind of like someone else will touch you and I might not be that person. And often I also don't have an expectation of the person being changed, right? And so just thinking about in this moment, this is what I can give, and whatever transformation needs to happen for them will come, even if it's not me. So I don't believe that it won't happen, but I think I've done less protecting and being open to the call that I'm receiving. But there are moments where those things become problematic, that I have to walk away. And there are some of those moments where you have to keep pushing. I had that yesterday with someone, and I just continued to ask over again and just kind of named it out loud. I said, you know, these are conversations I'm constantly having. And this is what I said at the end of the conversation. And then I said, we have to keep talking about race. I said, you might not be there yet. And it was uncomfortable. You know, this was someone that was coming to seek advice around restorative justice. And I had to name that. I said, that might be uncomfortable, but you need to keep talking about it. And so I think just really trusting and holding space for other folks to share. Because sometimes if you've been doing the work, you feel like you know, and you can say this one thing to the person and they should be changed. You can tell them the story, you can show them the film, you can give them the book. And for some people, it takes a longer time. And so I think just holding space for folks to share their narratives. But the moment that it begins to inflict a wound on you, I think being able to be courageous and say, I need to move from the table and this might not be my work to do with you. What about you, Tom?
Well, you know, being someone who has been raised white, who is considered white, I think there's it's a real different experience. And there's a lot of white folks who, I look at in the STAR program, Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, and you know the cycles of violence that we get caught up in, acting out against others, acting against ourselves in response to trauma. Very natural, very normal, and it's kind of the go-to for our lizard brain reactions. And then there's the snail model of breaking free from those cycles of violence, and it's memorializing, and it's digging deep into the woundedness, understanding that healing begins where the wound was made. As was it Alice Walker that said that? I'm not 100% sure, but that is where the work is that needs to be done, is throughout this journey towards freedom. A lot of white folks want to go right to the end where the word reconciliation is. And it's like, because the work is really hard work. But if in fact we're going to do this work, it requires diving in. One of the cool resources I found several years ago, and we refer to it in the book, there's a 2007 guide called I Can Fix It, and focused on racism by a woman and author and named Damali Ayo. And she asked 2,000 people what individuals can do to end racism. And she compiled the 2 lists of 5 predominant answers, action steps for white people and people of color. And so some brief excerpts. For white people, admit you have a race and that racism exists. Second, listen to people of color, honor their experience and their outrage. 3, educate yourself seriously. And 4th, broaden your experience, but please don't do this before completing steps 1 through 3. So don't go and talk to some person of color and say, can you help me figure out my own racism? Do the work, do the work. And, for people of color, be yourself. Don't play into white negative stereotypes. Love yourself and one another. Speak out, talk, and listen to white people. Make your presence known. Educate yourself about the accomplishments of people of color. Teach your kids to have pride in who they are, and deal with your own issues of prejudice, and on it goes. But this is in the book. It's also a link to the full thing is on the Little Book webpage on the Coming to the Table site. But this is where I see is when there's issues of white people shrinking back, of white fragility, This is one of the issues that we try to deal with in the little book for sure, in the recommended reading that to help people learn more, and in the trainings that we do. You know, this little book is now sort of a foundational element for future trainings, and these are the elements that we'll be working with and hopefully helping inspire people to deal with the issues that come up. I mean, in all the world, this issue of race is such a powerful, divisive, harmful, centuries-old inherited wound. And we have a lot of work to do individually, separately, collectively, to make that difference. And we try to do that in the trainings that we do, and in the way that we've tried to put this little book together, so that people do see that there are a variety of ways, a variety of options, a variety of techniques to heal. And we try and touch on a wide variety, both in the book and what we do in person.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jody. And we have a number of questions. So you all have so much to say, but for these questions coming up, I'm gonna ask you all to just keep in mind that we have a number of them coming. First, a few more just shout outs that have come through. So one, hello to Kate Daniels, who is in Chicago, Illinois, Restorative Justice in the 48th Ward. Also from Mauricio Leniguez in Madera, California, who will be ordering the book today. And then some just comments, one from Cassandra Lane in Los Angeles, a sidebar story contributor. Thank you for this deep and rich conversation and for this necessary book, Tom and Jody. I love your honesty and how difficult it was to let go of your resistance, Jody, and how you call on white people to start from their history, Tom. So some comments for you. We have other kind of thank yous from just for providing the book. A few people who are really enjoying, Marissa is one of them, enjoying really reading this book and providing this great resource. Also a hi from Hyatt Bain in the Richmond, Virginia, coming to the table chapter. Was really excited about the book, that shortly after it was gifted to me, I find myself passing it on to a friend who was a minister at what was once known as the Church of the Confederacy. And for those of you who are interested in that story more, we actually did a webinar recently that you can find in our past webinars on a little bit about some work going on at that church. And then finally, kind of for now, before we get to another question from Trina. Hi, Trina. Trina Nussbaum saying, congratulations to both of you on finishing this very important book. So grateful for your presence in this world. Love you both. So thank you, Trina. And I speak for all of us in saying we love you too. Thank you for that comment. So now to some questions, some more questions. One question that came that was really interesting is asking, does the book address how patriarchy impacts the wounds of racism? And I guess just I would even expand that question more generally. How do you get at, or do you kind of touch on in the book, the relationship between racism, white supremacy, and other systems of oppression and how they are structured in relationship to one another? So the question from this person was, does it touch on patriarchy in relationship to racism?
I can see we're looking at each other like, who should go first on this? And I don't remember the specific words. I haven't read the book in a few months at this point, but the relationship, the connection, the interconnectedness between all forms of oppression, from racism, patriarchy, gender discrimination, religious oppression, you name it. That they all grow in the same rich, fertile soil of fear. And so there's a definite connection among them all. Our focus here is specifically on racial healing. And so the mentions that come through on the connections between the others are inherent in the book, but it's not like there's a chapter on patriarchy. But really appreciate the question, and absolutely, I mean, you're sort of looking at the image of centuries and centuries of oppression in white, male, able-bodied, heterosexual, raised Christian guy here. And so all of this stuff is living within me and other people that are like me. And so it's a very important aspect of this work. And our focus is on issues of race.
I would just say I agree with that. Yeah, I would just say I agree with that. I think we had a lot of conversations about it. I think for me, especially as a Black woman, when we talk about police terrorism and its threat against, the bodies of Black men and boys, that's something that we talked a lot about. And I think that's a challenge with writing a little book. I think I've learned to own my voice as a writer, to say that this isn't that book. And so I think that's what we were really balancing as we were writing the book, that there are many other things that we wanted to put in, but that's for another book.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I know that was a little bit of a tough question, and I think it was tough in some ways, even like how do you talk about racism in ways that acknowledging that people experience it differently because of its entanglement with other systems of oppression, but also, of course, given that it's a little book, right? What are the kind of overall frameworks that you're offering in this little book?
And can I also add just one brief comment, and that is, I'm not suggesting this for the person who submitted this question. Just in general, there are a lot of ways in which white people want to deflect, and particularly progressive, liberal white people. And I'll use a different example. There are white women who will say, I understand your pain because I'm oppressed as a woman, and to a person of color in relation to racism. And so one of the things that we encourage people not to do is to deflect to, some of the most challenging people to understand the importance of coming to the table are white, progressive, liberal people. Because we consider ourselves beyond racism and don't recognize the ways in which we continue to contribute to the perpetuation of racism by the way we walk and talk in the world. And we can do that with patriarchy, with religion, with gender discrimination, whatever it is. So I just wanted to highlight that aspect of this as well. Thanks.
Sure, and that actually relates really well to a few questions that came in. So I'm going to ask you these questions together. One is, so I'm going to give you about 3 questions at once that are really, I think, are related. One comes from a member of an informal group that they call White Women Interrupting Racism. This person says, for 2 years, we have been practicing interruption scenarios and also reading text from people of color and select white folks. Jody, this question is particularly targeted to you. What would you recommend that we do? Any specific text other than your new book? Tom, I know that you've named White Fragility, but this question is especially Jody. Any text you would recommend? The second question is especially for you, Tom. This one is from Katrina Poplet saying hello and also thanks for speaking and writing this book. Tom, how do you help or encourage white people to move from guilt to a place of listening and action, especially when they don't have a background like many of the Coming to the Table members? And you've spoken a little bit to this already, but any particular kind of just quick tips or strategies to help or encourage white people that you kind of your go-to, what do you pull out of your pocket? And then a third question that I'm gonna throw into this same group. And this question is actually coming from Alexis Roldan, who received this book today from an internship supervisor at a mediation and community outreach organization in Blacksburg, Virginia. Says, can't wait to read it. And so and Alexis is saying it's evident that a sort of mutual respect is very important for racial healing. So what can be done about people who don't want to foster this sort of environment or don't want to heal or help racial wounds? What about people who think there are no wounds to heal in the present day? And so in general, kind of these are questions about 1, just text, 2, strategies to help white people, and then in general, what about people who are not coming from a place of respect or don't even acknowledge that there's an issue? Is this book for them, or where would they start?
So real quick, there's always more that is required than reading. I will recommend some authors, but I just think it's important to name that. I think it's important to be in community with people of color, thinking about also where your money is being aligned. What are the conversations that you're having with friends? What are the conversations that you're having with family? That this kind of healing requires us to stretch ourselves in ways that we cannot imagine. And so thinking about what does it mean for the text to move into action, right? What are the ways that you're engaging and showing up in community? And then the next thing I would say, Vanya Davis is coming out with a book in April, definitely going to be a recommended reading. It is going to be absolutely incredible. Anything by Bell Hooks, Michael Eric Dyson, W.E. Du Bois, I think those are really incredible books to read. I think it is an opportunity to really engage in ways to talk about both healing, but also harm. I will also say James Cone, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Racism shows up in many ways than we think. There's also another little book by David Anderson Hooker, but also really encouraging you to kind of move beyond the text and thinking about what it means to take action around the ways that you're engaging with folks in community. But that might not look like you, might not be at the same kind of socioeconomic status as you, to really stretch yourselves beyond that. And in terms of the third question, when it comes to this idea around mutual respect, I think it's about dignity. I think folks, I don't even think it's necessarily about respect. I think it's about dignity, that there's a way that in the circle process, the dignity of all are being restored and people feel safe enough to name the things they don't know and to ask the questions about things they want to know more about. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this book is for everyone. I think, you know, when folks are challenged, that's when they go, I think, more deeply into themselves. We just don't see it. So sometimes, you know, I've been in racial healing circles where folks have shown up, you know, they do a mic drop by saying some things that are really harmful, right? But the response they might think that they want from folks is not the response that they get. And it's a moment for them to check themselves, to say that the normal thing that has been happening is not going to happen here, right? And I think those opportunities is a teachable moment, even if they don't know that they're learning a lesson, right? And there's a transformation, I believe, that happens when people leave the space, even if they don't say anything about it. And so I think that's the hard part around healing these wounds, that there's a lot of work that people are doing that we don't see. I will say, yes, this book is for them, but also, if I'm keeping it real, I don't lean into that there are many people who are doing this work and are positioned in different ways. And all of them are not writing a book. Some of them are teaching, you know, in an academic classroom. Some of them are teaching their children about race in this world and how to dismantle the system. Some of them are fashion designers that are saying we need more representation. Some of them are YouTube bloggers that are saying this is what the beauty industry looks like and how it's embedded within racism. And so I think also thinking about creatively where people are aligned in dismantling our system of racial hierarchy and its history. Hope that answered your question. It went a little bit off when I started talking about makeup, but I think that's what I'm being called to say.
Thanks, Jody. The question about encouraging white folks to move from guilt to a place of learning or listening or action when they don't have a coming to the table background. Well, this little book will give you a coming to the table background. But more important than that is when we were making the film Traces of the Trade in 2001, there's a scene in the film where Juanita, the one African-American producer of the film, is in the room and talking about why she does this work with white people. And she talks about how I'm doing this because it's for the liberation of my people. And it's for the liberation of you guys, looking at all these white people descended from enslavers in the room. And that has always stuck with me, is that this is a journey towards liberation for all of us. And, you know, I get asked this question about what, you know, why do you do this? How do you get past these feelings of guilt? What do you know, what's the journey? And it really is all about the liberation. And it's about doing the work. And it's about, I mean, pick up the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and you know, that ancient Mexican Toltec religious text, and don't take things personally. We get so caught up in our own stuff that we close down and the walls of protection go up that really aren't walls of protection. They're walls that encase us in continued woundedness, which we then pass along to our children and our grandchildren. So doing the work, taking the step, and then taking the next step, and then taking the next step. Reading, listening, building the relationships, understanding your own personal history and your nation's history in real honest ways. And so that I think is the main thing is go for it. Don't be afraid. There's a lot of people doing this work and it's really healthy. And then there's people who don't want to admit it. That was the other question. People who don't want to recognize that there's wounds to heal in the present day. What I feel is I'm not going to reach everybody. There's people that are deep into their own woundedness, deep into their own fear and denial, and that's where they are. So the best I can do is to be my best self, to stand as witness, to stand as someone with my family or with my community or with books I write or songs I sing or paintings I create, is standing tall with the honesty of who I am and living that, being a living witness to the need to heal from these ancient wounds. That if we don't heal them, our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids are going to inherit them.
Thank you for that, Jody and Tom. Thank you so much. So a few more comments, and then some final questions as we're moving into the last 20 minutes of our webinar, some of which will include some announcements from the Zaire Institute. So this comment comes from Ellen Fernandez Sacco. Thanks for adding to the complexity of what often falls into a binary. Ellen is really appreciating the discussion and the call to action. Looking forward to getting the book, and quoting Fannie Lou Hamer, "Nobody's free until everybody is free." Thank you for that comment. Another comment from Ellen Berry. Hi, Ellen. She's expressing so much gratitude to both of you for this critically important book, thanking you for your honesty, your brilliant analysis, and your courage in writing the book and engaging in this dialogue, and also some questions related to that. So I'm also going to kind of package this next group of questions as well. In general, the themes are kind of the order, and then I'll break it down into more detail based upon the comments. What is racial healing? So how do you define it, just briefly? What is your hope for how this book can be used toward racial healing? It's kind of the second step of that. And then thirdly, some specific guidance around how you would use this with schools. And then I'll kind of name some specific comments around that. And so the comment around kind of what racial healing, how do you define that term, came actually from Rusty Vaughn, who's with Coming to the Table in Albuquerque. Thank you, Rusty, for that question. And then Ellen was asking about your hopes for how the book can be used in racial healing. And then a question about schools actually came from a couple of people. Jane Kerrigan was commenting that, who's the Annapolis local group leader, who's commenting that the interest in racial healing and social justice is very high right now, especially getting requests from school groups. And then another question about the use in schools is coming from Carrie Feely, who is looking at using the book as a common read. And so is interested in how would you use the book with college students in terms of how do you prepare faculty and staff who may not be ready themselves to engage, let alone facilitate those conversations. The common reads, I think, are a really exciting idea, and I'm excited for how this book can be used for a common read. There was a list of, I read recently that this book, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, was a common read for Richmond, Virginia as a city. So I'm just excited about the possibilities for this book as a common read at universities and even cities as well. So racial healing, how do you define it? What are your hopes for the book in terms of racial healing, and some just overall quick suggestions for educators who are using this book in the classroom at various levels?
So real quick, unless you want to go first, Tom.
Go for it.
So in terms of defining racial healing, I honestly feel like the Fannie Lou Hamer quote really captures it all, right? Like the freedom of some is the freedom of all. And often we're taught to believe that liberation is not for all of us. And so often I think white folks are kind of like, how do I get my foot in? And I think also as I'm writing it down, I think it's really about taking steps to dismantle the racial caste system that addresses both our personal woundedness from our history and legacy of slavery, but also the structural one. So that, I think that's a way that I would define racism. But I think if I'm talking to white people, I will also really open up the space to talk about their own fear of losing their whiteness. Right? Like that there is a level of fear that white people walk around with, whether it's acknowledged or not, of their fear of losing their whiteness. And I think, you know, we've seen the violent ways that has come about through our society over the last few years. And so that's how I define racism and engage with white folks around race. I think this is an incredible tool for schools. I think that young people are ready, they understand the system, they want to talk about it. I think one of the things is for schools being able to create these cultural ways to talk about racism. So you're not having this one teacher that might say that they're reading this book in their classroom, but how does the school kind of take on an approach of being able to engage in these conversations around race, especially as the demographics of our country begin to change? There's going to be a deeper need to talk about it. On college campuses, you have a lot of student groups. I think that's a really good way to get this reading in ways that don't scare the school a little bit much. You know, it pushes them, but I think in a different way that's saying that I'm with you. And so, you know, in reading this book, it's a tool for us to grow as an institution. And so I'm thinking about your diversity action committee. This is something that they should be reading. Your student life, that this is something that they should be reading, especially your kind of conflict resolution or mediation center on campus. This is something that they should be reading, but also use this as an opportunity to engage with a lot of the student organizers on campus to name what their needs are. And even for the organizations that might not be doing organizing, how do you use this as an opening to say, what are the shifts that you want to see happen on this college campus? And how do I provide or hold a space for those conversations to emerge on a larger level? And so I think this book is a real tool for teaching, but I think there are also other books can really support the approach that we're providing, you know, when we think about restorative justice in schools, for example, looking into some more of those tools as well to be able to scaffold the information that we're presenting here, because it's heavy and can also become scary sometimes. So I hope that answered your question.
You know, and we've both done a lot of work in schools, speaking, leading workshops and speaking to classrooms, speaking to large groups. And there's two aspects to this. That one for us to think about is people in high school and college, they're at the stage where they're beginning their power years in life, and they're going to be, you know, running businesses and, you know, starting families, building communities, getting nominated to be judges and Supreme Court judges, running for political office. And so it's critically important to give people this anti-racist, anti-oppression, support for healing lens when they're at the age where they're building the foundation for the rest of their lives. The second piece of this is one of the challenges that in working in college university spaces in particular is that every 2 years in a community college and every 4 years in a university, the entire student population has turned over. And so whatever work is being done for it to be sustainable needs to be grounded in faculty, administration, and staff of these institutions. And so that's where I think a lot of the work needs to be done is making sure that our professors and our college presidents and administrators and staff are also recognizing the importance of being awake, being aware when it comes to issues of race. And again, just hoping that this little book will become one of the tools that helps in that process.
I think that's such a great point that you made, Tom, about how so often these conversations are limited to sometimes only students or even only students and faculty, and doesn't reach that administrative level of people who really have the power to make a lot of the decisions, including decisions over, you know, whether the university will recognize the history and, you know, kind of contribute in some way to reparations for the ways that they benefited from slavery, for example. So that's a really great point. Last just quick question is actually an opportunity for you to talk about the training workshops, which we see on the screen, that you all will be facilitating some coming to the table approach training workshops in Asheville, North Carolina, and here in Harrisonburg this summer. And so can you talk just a little bit about these upcoming training workshops, what people will learn, and also the format? Is it people just sitting in desks, listening to lectures, or opportunities for interaction? Can you just share a little bit about what people can expect?
Yes, it will be sitting in desks and listening to lectures for 3 weeks. No, it's very much an interactive experience. And both of these are 3 days, full days, 3-day trainings. And at the Coming to the Table website, on the homepage are links to both of these trainings that give descriptions of them, that have a sample of the schedule for the 3 days and what the topics that will be covered, as well as the ability to register. And I mean, we just opened registration literally today and already have 2 people signed up in Asheville. So it covers, you know what, it covers what's in this little book, but it does it in a way that's interactive. Everything we do is in circle. You know, looking at this page, you can see that's one of the trainings that was done that we participated in the past, with a circle process, with small group dialogue, with a centerpiece. And we really try to live the model as well as teach the model, so that people, when they depart, are going home with tools in order to use that in their own communities, whether it's a Coming to the Table affiliate group or another you know, social justice related group that they're part of, or their church or their school or whatever it may be, that they're going home with more tools. That's a different way of approaching this than sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture. I just have been so moved by the classes I've taken at the Summer Peace Building Institute at EMU in trauma healing, restorative justice, you know, using media for social justice, circle process with Kay Pranis. It's just a profound experience to learn in circle, where you're accountable to each other because you're looking at each other all day, every day, not looking at the back of the head of somebody in front of you. You're really in community together. And that's what these will be, you know, experiential as well as interactive, as well as a focus on the content, so that people can go home with these good resources.
That sounds incredible. And in addition to that resource, I understand that Coming to the Table also has another book that will be coming out later this year that is an anthology. Can you just give us a few words about that as we close?
Yeah. I happen to have it right here. Rutgers University Press is going to be publishing Slavery's Descendants, and this is a book that was envisioned a few years ago by Jill Strauss and Dion Ford, 2 longtime Coming to the Table members, and they are the editors of this book. And there are, I believe it's 25 different authors who submitted chapters, and it's broken up into 4 sections of the pillars, the stories that relate to history, healing, connecting, and action. And that'll be coming out May 10th. And it's available for order right now. And I haven't even read all these stories yet, and very much looking forward to this book. I'm just adding that much more. You know, we have a lot of writers with Coming to the Table. Dion Ford has her own book coming out here pretty soon as well, right on these issues. So there you go.
Thank you. That is exciting. Well, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to talk about this new book with us, and also to congratulate you. Congratulations on the book being out. Congratulations on this publication that we can all benefit so much on, and learning more about this model and the approach and how to bring it to our own communities. So thank you so much, Tom and Jody. Again, for joining us today. And please, for those of you joining us, please don't go away just yet, because we have some important announcements from the Zehr Institute about some upcoming webinars and some other offerings that will be here at Eastern Mennonite University, as well as other locations that you can benefit from, some of which relate very closely to what you've heard, including, I think, an offering that Jody is co-teaching coming up, maybe in those announcements. And if not, I'll share about it with my final comments from the webinar. So hold on just a moment while we go to Julian Ward, who was our graduate assistant, for a few announcements as we close. Thank you all so much, and thank you all guests for joining us. Thanks for tuning in for a few more minutes as we give some important updates on what's coming up next.
Thank you, Johonna, and thank you, Tom and Jody. We have some upcoming webinars. On February 20th, a webinar on RJ work in Korea and Northeast Asia, a case study in implementation, innovation, and adaptation. And on March 20th, Restorative Circles and Healthcare Systems, RJ as an approach to health equity and justice. You can find out more at zairinstitute.org. We also have upcoming STAR trainings. Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, otherwise known as STAR, is a research-based training program that brings together theory and practice from neurobiology, conflict transformation, human security, spirituality, and restorative justice to address the needs of trauma-impacted individuals and communities. This program is designed for individuals and organizations whose work brings them into contact with populations dealing with current or historic trauma. Visit the website to find out more. We also offer a Restorative Justice Graduate Certificate, which is 18 credit hours with equal focus given to conflict analysis and practice, restorative justice studies, and electives which could focus on monitoring evaluation and psychosocial trauma. The certificate can be completed through a number of courses offered through the annual Summer Peacebuilding Institute, or through a combination of one semester on campus and one summer term. If you're interested in the intersection of RJ and education, we offer an MA in education with a restorative justice concentration, and also a 15-hour graduate certificate in RJ in education, and can be used by a variety of professionals working in educational settings. There's also a master's degree in conflict transformation and another in restorative justice. I'm in the restorative justice one. The curriculum is practice-based and ideal for individuals looking to be reflective practitioners within their chosen field. And last but not least, visit our site, the Zaire Institute website, which is available as a source for upcoming events, resources, the schedule of upcoming webinars, and a repository for past webinars that are linked to YouTube. The recording for tonight's webinar will be available early next week. And that concludes my announcements. Back to Johonna.
Thank you so much, Julian. So an additional announcement that I don't think that we mentioned, Jody and Tom mentioned about the Coming to the Table workshops that are one in Asheville, and then the one in Harrisonburg is June 7th through, June 7th through 10th. But right before that, Jody is co-teaching a class with Fania Davis and Lenore Bajari Dukes called Truth Telling, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. And that the title again is Truth Telling, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. And that course is offered as part of Eastern Mennonite University Summer Peacebuilding Institute. It's been going for a few years now, and it is one of our most popular courses. It fills up pretty quickly. So I'd encourage you all to visit the Summer Peacebuilding Institute website at the Eastern Mennonite University, and you can learn more about that course. And that course is actually developed, initially developed by Fania Davis, who's been leading this national work around the country on racial healing and racial justice and restorative justice. And Fania also has an upcoming book coming out in April that I just want to mention the name of that. And that's called The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives Healing and U.S. Social Transformation. And again, that's with Dr. Fania Davis, and that's coming out in April. So a lot of excellent resources, a lot of opportunities for learning and face-to-face connection. Thank you all so much again, Jody, Tom, thank you, Julian, thank you, Patience, and thank you to all of the guests for all of your comments, your questions, and just tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you all next month for our next webinar. Have a great afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye.